go do something if there's a 10% chance that you were going to die from it?
I don't know, dude.
I won't go do something if there's a 10% chance that lunch won't be ready when I'm done with it. You know what I'm saying?
I do know that about you. Yeah. It is a chore getting you to help out with anything that I have going on.
Is there food after? I'm not going.
Welcome.
Oh, here we go.
Welcome to the Low Grade Research Podcast.
Dude, I have been thinking about this episode all day, and I've been pumped.
Good. You're supposed to prepare it all day.
Well, I stayed up.
I don't prepare mine all day.
Yeah, you prepare yours at all. No, I stayed up. Okay. I actually researched this one last night. I've got like a running list like you do of topics I want to cover. And I was looking through it and I just wasn't really feeling it. And then I was like thinking about the episode that I wanted to do. And then I started thinking back to when I was a kid, all the things that I thought was really cool. And it kind of just circled back to like adventure things. You know what I mean? And I've got kind of a passive fascination with mountaineering.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, I don't have the body type or the discipline or the lifestyle choices.
Or the time, man.
Or the time or the money, frankly, because it's...
Well, there's not a lot of money in mountaineering.
Well...
Unless you can find buried treasure.
Oh, no. There is a ton of money in mountaineering.
What?
It's not for the person who's the mountaineer.
Okay.
We'll talk about it.
Wait, so were you talking about mountaineering?
A very specific kind in a very specific place.
I was like, did you announce the topic?
No,
you just said you
yet.
had a interest of high adventure or a fantasy of high adventure.
So mountaineering. So I started thinking about that and thinking that's like such an adventurous thing.
Sure.
It's you versus nature. You're getting in there. It's like survival. It's very visceral and like tribal. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so then I thought, let's talk about Mount Everest.
Okay. Yeah. That's a big mountain.
And then I thought, nah.
Everyone knows about Mount Everest.
Everybody knows about Mount Everest. But I have also had kind of a passing fascination with K2. Have you ever heard of K2?
Yes. Is that a mountain?
It is.
Okay. I know it's like a active where like it's a brand that does like climbing gear and
it's based
adventure
on the
stuff.
mountain.
And I heard it was named after a mountain.
So Mount Everest is the tallest mountain.
Right.
K2 is about 800 feet shorter.
Okay.
But is the most technically difficult mountain to climb on Earth.
Okay. Where's it at?
It's about 800 miles or so as a crow flies away from Mount Everest.
Oh, so not that far.
So it's technically not
relative.
the same. It's not the same. It's in the Karakoram mountain range.
Okay.
And Everest is in the Himalayan mountain range.
Right.
But it's like one mountain range kind of stacked behind another.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, we want to talk about K2. It's also the old nickname is the Savage Mountain.
Oh, that's a great nickname.
And then we're gonna link this, but in the show description and send it on Instagram. But there is a video that I'm going to show you, Mitch, at the end of this. That is one of probably the most phenomenal things I've ever seen.
Cool.
And made me absolutely sick to my stomach.
Oh,
it's awesome. Not gory, just phenomenal.
Okay. So phenomenal.
Nobody dies.
Made you sick.
Yeah.
Cool.
You want to get into it?
Yeah.
K2.
The Savage Mountain.
All right, so I mentioned it's part of the Karakoram mountain range. It's close to the Himalayas, about 820 miles away from Mount Everest as a crow flies. So it's the second highest peak in the world. It's 28,244 feet tall.
That's not even comprehensible.
No, it's not.
That's just a big number.
So the tallest peak in Utah is Kings Peak, and it's, I think, somewhere around 15,000 feet high.
Oh, wow.
There's a mountain. I mean, you and I have grown up around mountains.
Right.
And we have like mountains.
No,
like
we've got good mountains.
People
here.
come from other states that we know or friends or whatever, and they'll say like, wow, like you guys live in the shadow of these mountains. Like they're right there, they're huge. And so there's a big mountain that we grew up kind of under, so to speak, called Maple Mountain. Mm-hmm. And that Maple Mountain is about 9,000 feet tall.
Wow.
So think about a mountain that is three times larger than Maple Mountain.
That's insane.
It would dwarf it.
Yeah.
Incomprehensible. Truly something that I want to go see at some point in my life.
Yeah.
Actually, we've got a mutual friend named Alex.
Yep.
Who's obsessed with motorcycles. And he would talk to me all the time about going on you know what a Royal Enfield is, of course.
A Royal Enfield?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like...
Maybe I do. I just don't know the term.
It's a motorcycle, and it's kind of like it's a wartime motorcycle.
Okay, sure.
Kind of like Britain's... they're really not the same thing, but like kind of like how Harley Davidson is a historical like wartime motorcycle in the United States. It's kind of the same deal in Britain.
Okay, sure.
Right. So people use them, and we'll have to fact check.
What were they called? What were they called again?
Royal Enfields.
Royal Enfields. Okay, yeah. Sure.
But people will ride them, and they'll do like Himalayan tours on them. So.
Oh, cool.
So you can go with this tour company, and then there's like 15 people, and you're all on motorcycles riding through the Himalayas.
That would be so cool. I've read, and I think you've shown me actually a few like that go through Vietnam.
Yeah.
And you can do the mountains and jungles of Vietnam on a motorcycle.
Doesn't that sound awesome?
It sounds incredible.
It sounds like once in a lifetime kind
really,
of thing.
Though.
Yeah.
Really.
So when we hit our midlife crisis here in
8 months,
10, 15 minutes, we can book it. And
sorry, babe.
Tell our wives after that we booked it.
Something came up.
And damn the expense.
Absolutely.
All right, where are we? So 28,244 feet, or I'm going to be doing meters and feet in this episode.
So is that how tall the mountain is, or how high above sea level it is?
Well, both, because sea level is the benchmark.
Sure, but like, wouldn't it be... I guess I just don't know how, if they measure mountains by...
I see what you're saying.
By height of sea level, or like, I mean... We live in the valley here, but the mountain next to us, is that measured from the base of the valley type of thing? I'll have to look into that. I feel like it would be that. You know what I mean?
I think that you're right. And I vaguely remember reading that, because there's a bunch of glaciers that run. Honestly, pictures and stuff of this region look like it's mountains and big giant rivers below, because it's just huge glaciers.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. So I want to say maybe it's 28,000 from that glacier, but... Okay. At any rate, if it's from sea level or if it's from that glacier, that's an enormous thing to even comprehend.
Yeah.
Right? So like I said, I'll be doing feet and meters in this episode, because most of it's all of this really is in the metric system.
Sure.
And so the meters is conversions just for us dumb Americans to keep track.
Well, and the meters is for our few listeners out of country.
All right, so 28,244 feet or 8,600 meters, right?
Wow.
For reference, Everest is 29,031 feet or 8,800 meters. So it's about 250 meters shorter than Everest.
Wow, so that's really not that much.
No, but we'll get into it.
It's a close second is what I'm trying to say.
It's much more technically difficult. Not that Everest is a walk in the park, but it's much more technically difficult.
Sure.
So K2 is one of 14 8,000ers is what they call them. And it's one of 14 mountain peaks that are above 8,000 meters.
Wow.
Which is considered, anything above 8,000 meters is considered the death zone is what they call it.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough, the pressure of oxygen isn't enough up there to support human life. I mean, for an extended time.
So you're saying no one lives up there?
I hope not. They're not the kind of person we want to run into, I'll tell you that.
If they do.
Like I said, it's considered the most technically difficult mountain to climb in the world. And before 2021, 1 in 4 people died climbing it.
Whoa, what?
At a 23.5% death rate.
That's so insane.
Yeah. It only improved. From everything I read, it just kind of seemed like it was kind of, the equipment's gotten better after 2021. People have gotten smarter. Things have worked out better, and it really seems like a good chunk of it is luck.
Sure.
Has just worked out, and the weather has worked out, because the weather's a huge deal in this. So since after 2021, it still has a 13% death rate.
That's still so much.
So about 1 in 10 people that climb will die.
Would you go do something if there's a 10% chance that you were going to die from it?
I don't know, dude.
I won't go do something if there's a 10% chance that lunch won't be ready when I'm done with it. You know what I'm saying?
I do know that about you. Yeah. It is a chore getting you to help out with anything that I have going on.
Is there food after? I'm not going.
Actually, it's just easy to get you here. I can promise a cold pizza, and you're here in like 10 minutes.
Got a meatball sub over here.
No, I don't know. I mean, we'll talk about this more at the end, but I thought about that when I researched this, because I watched the whole thing. Like I said, there's highs and lows that are going to be in this episode, breathtaking things that happen, gut-wrenching things that happen. And then I had kind of a thought at the very end, like if I were to do something like this, I'd take a little vial up with me.
Okay.
And take a tiny bit of snow off the very peak, put in that little vial. And then down here, back at home, you'd have a little vial with a tiny bit of water in it, and to just know, like,
where it's
who knows if that's even legal. I'm sure they would prevent people from doing that. But
it's, it's like one of the where you take sand from a beach.
Yeah.
And then you've got a souvenir.
I had that thought of like, how cool would that be? And then to have that little bit of water and then know the journey that you had to go to get that.
Yeah.
And then remembered all of the stuff I just read about this mountain, and then decided firmly that was never going to be something in my future. It's just never going to happen.
I'll just look at the pictures.
I mean, we're talking about the expense alone is really prohibitive, but yeah, we're going to talk a lot about why this is so dangerous, and you're going to have the same opinion, I'm sure.
When I hear about these mountains, like I've had some friends that were like really big hikers and climbers.
Sure.
Like avid.
Yeah.
And they've hiked all the big peaks in the state and even out of state and stuff. And they have this like lifetime goal even of just reaching the base camp of Mount Everest.
Sure.
And like what a feat that is, let alone. And then you think about, there's people that have reached the summits of these types of mountains. And that's incomprehensible.
It's phenomenal.
Especially to someone like me.
Okay, so still has a 13% death rate. That since they started trying to climb it back in, I think the first attempt, we'll get into it on the first attempts. I want to say it was 1909 maybe. That's
like the first recorded attempt?
Yeah, like official. And we'll talk about, it really wouldn't have been attempted before that, even by locals, and we'll talk about why.
Oh.
But since then, there have been 800 successful summits.
Wow.
Right? 96 deaths.
Wow.
That's compared to Everest, where there have been 11,996 successful summits.
Whoa, really?
And 340 deaths. So the death rate on Everest is like 1.8 or something percent.
Okay.
The death rate on K2 is 13.
Yeah. 13 now.
Still.
It was 23 before.
And it's that's an average, by the way.
Sure.
Because we're going to talk about some disasters that happen. Like seasoned people who've climbed their whole lives and are the most prepared people to do this have been wiped out in the blink of an eye just because of sheer happenstance.
Wow.
Right? So I ended up finding this kind of cool thread on Reddit. This guy who'd tried to climb K2. So, because I was trying to figure out like what made it more difficult than Everest, right? So this guy's quote, Bootsy Hamilton is the username.
Oh, he's a climber for sure.
Well, yeah. So they say K2 is harder because of the remoteness, the weather, the lack of support, and the steepness, and the objective dangers of the route. One sobering thought: on Everest you find bodies. On K2 you find pieces of bodies.
Oh, what?
Because the falls are so far and so violent, bodies are broken into pieces. Success on K2 is whether you and your team survive.
Oh, man.
So from an outsider looking in, you're like, oh, you went and tried to climb K2 and you didn't get the top? Like, bummer for you.
Like,
you know what I mean?
We're alive.
It's like you have no idea what I saw when I was up there.
Yeah.
You know?
Demons.
Mountain demons.
That's crazy, dude. I know there's a place on Everest. What do they call it? Like the Rainbow Bridge or something?
I don't know.
There's this spot where because if you die on Everest, they can't go retrieve your body, right? So there's this stretch where if you get up to a certain point, you can see it, and it's just colored dots of all the jackets that are up there, and they call it like the rainbow something.
That's crazy, dude.
That's wild. So they don't even have that on K2 because it's just the pieces.
I mean, there are recognizable bodies in similar ways.
It's not everybody.
But yeah, I mean, it's so steep, dude, that if you lose your footing and you're down, you're falling 1,000 feet, and they're not going to find you.
Whew.
So most summit attempts rather happen between July and August because that's when the weather's best.
Yeah. And
calling the weather best is a huge overstatement because it's horrific weather there almost all the time.
Right.
The first successful summit was achieved in 1954 by an Italian expedition, and in January 2021, the first successful winter ascent was made.
Oh, someone did it in the winter?
Yeah, and they have tons and tons of people have tried before then, by the way.
Yikes.
And the first time it was, I think, a Russian expedition we'll talk about later, was in just 2021. That was the first time they ever did it.
That was the first successful one. That's so crazy.
All ridges on the mountain have been climbed. We'll talk about all the ridges and why they're each uniquely dangerous later on. Except for the eastern face. Actually, I think there's two. I think I wrote about another one later on. But the eastern face, they call it the Shining Wall. And it's no one has ever, tons of people have tried. No one has ever successfully climbed it, ever. due to its lack of stability, extreme weather conditions, isolation, lack of established routes, and an extreme 10,000-foot steep ascent.
Golly.
It remains unclimbed to this day. So that's the overview. You ready to get into the meat and potatoes?
Just the overview?
Oh, yeah.
Holy cow.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the history of it, so where the name came from and kind of like how it came into, I guess, the Western world's awareness, right? So it was named K2 during a British survey in 1856. So the way the article puts it was that it was a British survey on British territory.
Okay.
So K2 is owned by 3 countries, technically. It's in the territory of 3 countries. Part of it is in China, part of it is in India, and part of it is in Pakistan.
Okay.
And the peak actually is in Pakistan. But kind of some of the country dividing lines kind of follow on some ridges that go up even.
Interesting.
So this British dude, Thomas Montgomery, was out there surveying. And we should, at some point, it would be cool probably to talk about surveying and how that works, but because I didn't really get into it here. But he was in the Karakoram range. And so he denoted peaks with a K and then named them peak K1, K2, K3, K4, K5.
Okay.
Right? Afterward, they tried to find as many local names as possible to just call them what they're supposed to be called. And so all the other K peaks, K1, K3, K4, and K5, all were given their local name. But K2, they never found a local name. And the article says because it's so remote that most locals had never even seen it.
I was gonna say it's because no one's even been there.
Because it's like, I want to say it's like 14 miles in super rough, crazy terrain.
Oh, so like you got to go 14 miles in just to get to the base to start getting up there.
So like they're saying locals just never went back there.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Why would you? And then there were a couple of names that they kind of called it later on, but K2 was kind of the just commonly accepted one.
Yeah.
So even now, like locals and like Sherpas that will help call it K2, but like the spelling of it as we are seeing it is the letter K and the number 2.
Right.
But they would spell it Ketu or something like that, or Chetu.
Okay. Sure.
Chetu or K2. But that's what they all call it. So.
Oh, cool.
Another crazy thing is that it's possible to travel. I told you that Everest and K2 are about 820 miles apart. So it's possible to travel from K2 to Everest, never dropping below 4,500 meters, which is 15,000 feet.
Whoa.
15,000 feet.
Just like by walking through the mountains?
Yep.
That's so crazy.
And I said that the tallest peak in Utah is Kings Peak. It's 13,500 feet.
That's wild.
So you can go from K2 to Everest 800 miles without dipping below that.
That's so crazy.
Isn't that nuts? All right, you want to talk a little bit about early attempts
Yes,
at the
I
summit?
do.
So like I said, the first kind of awareness was the survey in 1856. In 1892, a British expedition was led by Martin Conway. They reached Concordia on the Baltoro Glacier. So kind of at the base of K2, there's this huge glacier that's the Baltoro Glacier.
Okay.
It's now used as the base camp for K2.
Okay, cool.
That area. In 1902, so 10 years later, the first serious attempt by Oscar Eckenstein, this name might sound familiar, Aleister Crowley.
Why does it sound familiar? Is he a writer?
Kind of. He's an occultist.
Okay.
He was a mountaineer and occultist, which he deserves his own episode, by the way, because he was like an occultist cult leader, kind of.
Okay.
And even like if you watch Supernatural.
I've seen a few episodes.
So one of the characters in the show is Aleister Crowley.
Okay.
So he's just like this weird enigmatic figure from history who was an occultist and like very strange, weird, like dark dude who also was a mountaineer who tried to climb K2.
Wow.
Very strange.
A lot of interests.
A man of many interests. So they tried to climb on the northeast ridge, and we'll talk about the difference later. They reached about 21,000 feet. Mind you,
that's pretty high.
This is 1902. They reached 21,000 feet on the world's most difficult mountain. That's 6,500 meters. And they did this with a lack of modern equipment and with bad weather. So we'll talk a lot about weather. This group, they were on the mountain for 68 days.
Whoa.
Out of those 68, there were 8 that were clear.
That's crazy.
They ended up abandoning their attempt due to illness, personality conflicts with Aleister Crowley, and bad weather.
That guy's crazy.
Yeah. Like, good move, dude.
Who names their kid Alistair?
Who names himself Alistair?
They let him name himself.
His name is Dave Jones. He chose this. All right, so what is that? 7 years later, there was a 1909 expedition. So Prince Luigi Amedeo, who was the Duke of Abruzzi, which is a region in southern Italy. They made it to 6,200 meters, which is about 20,000 feet. And then they decided they were done because it was so steep.
Yeah.
I'll show you pictures of this thing later, dude.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Unbelievable. Okay, so we fast forward a few years, 1938. We went from 1909 to 1938. That was the gap before the next people attempted this. It happens to be the first American expedition led by a guy named Charles Houston. He went the same way as the Italian prince, and he reached 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet.
All right, pretty good.
And they abandoned that attempt due to dwindling supplies and bad weather.
Darn that weather.
I know. Okay, so 1939 is kind of a disaster, the first kind of disaster on K2. So it's another American expedition. A man named Fritz Wiesner came within 200 meters of the summit, 660
for real?
feet. Tragedy kind of struck four members of the party, a man named Dudley Wolfe, and then 3 Sherpas. I'm going to say their names, and I'm going to get them wrong. Paseng Kikuli, Paseng Katar, and Pinso. All 4 of these men disappeared on the mountain.
Just vanished.
Vanished.
What in the world?
So then we kind of talk about probably what is the most, legendary expedition on K2, even now. It occurred in 1953, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a overview, and then I hate to do this, but I couldn't do it enough justice just to sum it up.
Sure.
So I've got a little excerpt out of an article that I'm just going to read word for word.
Oh, that's cool.
Cool. 1953 expedition led by Charles Houston, who was the same dude who did the one previous. And it's the most famous moment in mountaineering, maybe altogether. And it's simply known as the belay.
Okay.
So you and I have been climbing, and you know that if you go to an indoor rock climbing wall or something, usually one person will climb, and then another person stands at the bottom, and they belay them.
And they belay. Oh, I'm belay certified.
Me too. Not for what we're about to talk about. But the person who's responsible for belaying is like taking in the rope and then also using their body to stop the rope in a certain way to prevent the person who's in the air from coming to danger, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be a little bit different from what I'm about to explain, but like essentially it's one person stopping the progress of the rope to help another person.
Sure.
Right? All right, so the belay. Okay. So this is from the American Alpine Club at americanalpineclub.org. All right, so 1953. It's during the 3rd American expedition. 8 climbers built their high camp at 7,700 meters, right? So it's about 25,000 feet. This team included men named Pete Schoening, Charles Houston, Robert Bates, George Bell, Robert Craig, Art Gilkey, D. Molinar, and Tony Streether. On the 7th day of their ascent, they were climbing without oxygen. Schoening and his partners were within reach of the summit, and with their first ascent of the long-sought peak tantalizingly close, the weather turned, trapping the climbers for 10 days at 8,000 meters.
Ugh.
The storm raged on, destroying tents and dwindling supplies. Then Art Gilkey developed thrombophlebitis, which is also, I think, is deep vein thrombosis. Yeah, it's Aleister. He developed Aleister Crowley's cult.
Aleister got a hold of him.
At 8,000 meters. It's essentially a life-threatening condition where blood clots are brought on by high altitude.
Oh.
Usually in your legs, you get blood clots. And then if those clots make it to your lungs, then you die.
And you don't breathe.
Right. So the team had no choice but to descend. So without hesitation, they abandoned the summit attempt. They got themselves to work putting Gilkey to safety. So with an 80-mile-an-hour blizzard,
holy cow,
which is a Category 1 hurricane wind strength, the climbing team bundled their injured comrade in a sleeping bag in a tent and then were belayed by Schoening, Pete Schoening, and they began to lower him down perilous rock walls of, ice and snow. So they spent a full day doing this.
Wow.
They make it about 300 meters, about 1,500 feet,
Jeez.
in an 80-mile-an-hour blizzard over an entire day. That's as far as they make it.
That's incredible.
They were within sight of Camp 6, which was perched on a ledge about another 180 meters further across like this slope. And so Craig was the first to reach the site. He began building camp because they were just trying to get things ready to receive Gilkey. I'm just going to read the names. You don't really need to, I mean, the names are important, but it'll be hard to keep track a little bit, I think.
Sure.
But as Bell was working his way across the steep face, he slipped and he began to rocket down the side of the mountain.
Oh my gosh.
Bell was tied to Streether, who was also pulled off his feet and down the slope. The rope between the two climbers became entangled with the rope connecting Bates and Houston. And Molinaire.
Who was the one wrapped up in the sleeping bag?
Gilkey.
Gilkey. Okay. Keep going.
So we have Bell, Streether, Bates, Houston, and Molinaire. 5 climbers who all start rocketing down this mountain to their death. They have Gilkey tethered with them as well. So there's 6 men. They begin careening down the near vertical face, ragdolling down the mountain over 100 meters.
Oh my gosh.
Speeding toward the edge, a 2,000-meter fall to the glacier below.
Holy cow.
At the very last second, as the weight of 6 climbers slammed into him, Schoening thrust his ice axe into the snow behind a boulder, and with a hip belay, brought all 6 climbers to a stop.
No way.
The nylon rope, which was a relatively new piece of climbing gear at the time, went taut and shrank to about half its diameter.
Whoa.
But it didn't snap. The hickory axe that he had used held the strain. So Schoening, with a rope wrapped tightly around his shoulders, had performed what is now considered one of the greatest saves in mountaineering history, known forever as simply the belay. So it didn't happen without tragedy, unfortunately. So the incident, as the team recovered from the fall and they established a forced bivvy, which is like a temporary shelter. You're essentially just kind of wrapping up a tarp against the elements, kind of. So they set up a bivvy, and then they hear kind of a yell and some cries out, and then they discovered that Gilkey, who had been bundled in that sleeping bag, had vanished.
Oh my gosh.
So there's an official version, and then there's what everybody believes happened. So the official version is that a little avalanche took him and just took him down the mountain. But the climbers that day and kind of the wider community believed that he cut himself free of the ropes and sacrificed himself in order to make a safer descent for the other 5 guys.
Whoa. That's heavy.
That's
wild
heavy
stuff.
So essentially, long story short, one dude with a rope, quick thinking, and some real courage, and a hickory ice axe from the 1950s saved 6 men from falling 2,000 feet to their death.
Wow. Is there a movie about this?
There's quite a few movies.
Yes. Cool.
Just to kind of wrap up that story a little bit. So Art Gilkey's remains, they searched for them and they eventually found them 40 years later.
Really?
In 1993, they were melting out of a glacier on the south face of K2. So in 2006, the children of the Belays, what they call themselves, got together to recognize that none of them had ever been born if not for that hickory ice axe that Peter Schoening had. And if you want to go check it out, the ice axe is on display at the American Mountaineering Museum in Golden, Colorado.
Oh, cool.
You ready for more?
Yeah, dude. Keep going.
Why don't we talk about the first successful summit?
Yes. Yeah.
We'll talk about the first kind of couple, actually.
I've been waiting.
Okay, so we talk about all these things. So we discover, the Western world discovers the mountain in 1856, and we have a handful of official attempts leading up to 1953, which is that Belay disaster. So the first successful attempt happens the next year, in 1954. It's an Italian expedition, and we'll talk a little bit more about these in a minute. But there's different established climbing routes on the mountain.
Sure.
With all varying levels of difficulty, which difficulty in this context is a razor-thin margin.
Yeah.
Because all of it's horrifically difficult. So there's a climbing section called the Abruzzi Spur, which is named after Duke Abruzzi, who had attempted to climb it earlier on. This expedition was led by a man named Ardito Desio, and climbers that reached the summit were Lino Lacadelli, Archili Compaglioni, I'm screwing all these up, and then a Pakistani member, Colonel Muhammad Ataullah, who was also part of the fateful 1953 American expedition. So
cool.
He was there as well.
He went back?
Yeah.
Crazy.
The second successful summit was 23 years after that.
After that,
So 1954, and then we jumped 23 years to 1977. There was a Japanese expedition led by Ichiro Yoshizawa, and the first native Pakistani climber, Ashraf Aman, summited the mountain in August in 1977.
Wow.
And interestingly, they used about 1,500 porters, which are people who will help carry things or whatever. 1,500 people to help them get up there.
For that whole thing?
No, it didn't give a lot of detail. From what I've seen of the mountain, there's no possible way 1,500 people were up and down on that mountain.
Yeah.
But I think that they, like all the gear that they had and whatever else,
Sure.
just required a lot of people to move it. The third successful attempt was also in was the next year in 1978. It was an American team, including James Whitaker. The summit party was Louis Reinhardt, Jim Wickwire, John Roskelley, and Rick Ridgway. It's notable because Jim Wickwire endured an overnight temporary camp, a bivvy, just 150 meters or 490 feet below the summit.
Oh, wow.
Which is the highest bivvy anyone has ever made.
Yeah.
Ever. And it's also in the death zone and also horrifically cold and bad weather. So the word endure doesn't include sleep because he just settled in until the weather cleared.
Gosh.
Yeah,
he didn't rest and recover.
No.
He just waited it out. Suffered.
Yep, and prayed.
Golly.
First person to summit twice was a Czech climber named Josef Rakonkaj. And then the first woman to summit was a Polish climber, Wanda Rutkowicz. So there you go.
Wow.
That's a bunch of names I got wrong.
When did they summit?
I only wrote their names and their notable achievement.
Well, they did it.
They did it. I'm sorry I didn't.
That's incredible.
I'm sorry I didn't detail that better. Okay, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about kind of the major features in the climbing routes. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some disasters.
Okay.
Right after this.
And we're back. Thanks for holding out through that break. Now we're getting into some more exciting stuff about mountains.
I think we were going to jump back in talking about climbing routes, right?
That's right.
All right. So let's get into it. So there are several routes on the mountain. Each one has unique characteristics. A lot of them have kind of the same dangers, but they have unique characteristics, right? The same dangers they share are extreme altitude, reduced oxygen, extreme days, long storms, and very steep, exposed, and demanding routes. All major routes are on the Pakistani side.
Okay.
There's one or two, I think, that are established that are on the Chinese side, I think. The main one, probably the most well-known one, is the Abruzzi Spur, which we've talked about a little bit. So it's used by 75% of all climbers on K2. It features three notable features: House's Chimney, the Black Pyramid, and the Bottleneck. And we'll talk about these kind of here in a second because I think they deserve to be talked about. So Serac collapses, and a serac is a ridge of ice kind of on a glacial surface, so like kind of an overhang of ice.
Okay.
Serac collapses and avalanches are major hazards on the Abruzzi Spur.
Sure.
On the North Ridge is located on the Chinese side, and it's a very difficult to access and a very slide-prone hanging glacier. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Difficult to access and a very slide-prone hanging glacier.
And this is on the
Chinese side.
The Chinese side.
It's rarely climbed due to its technical difficulty and its isolation. The Northeast Ridge is a very long and corniced overhang, or corniced. It's very long and corniced. A cornice is like it's an overhang of hardened snow. So like like on a sand dune, the very lip on the very top of the sand dune that's blown over by the snow. There's kind of a little lip that overhangs a little bit. Right. It's kind of the same deal on a mountain. Okay. So as the wind blows the snow, it hardens the snow, and then it creates a cornice that's kind of like a snowy overhang going the direction the wind is blowing. Yeah. Okay. Right? Sure. So those can collapse all the time. At any moment. Very, absolutely. Very dangerous. If you take the Northeast Ridge, you end up joining in on the Abruzzi route, and that way was first summited in 1978 by Louis Reinhardt and Jim Wickwire, that American group. Yeah. The West Ridge, it was first climbed in 1981 by a Japanese team, and it contains unpredictable rock and snowfield dangers. Southwest Pillar is also known as the Magic Line, is extremely technical, demanding, only successfully climbed twice in history. Wow. 1986 and 2004.
Wow.
The south face is called the Polish line, and it's considered, frankly, suicidal because it has such significant avalanche danger. It was climbed one time.
Wow.
In 1986 by Jerzy Kakuska and Tadeusz Piotrowski. Don't write in about that. I'm doing my best. The northwest face is known for chaotic rock and snowfields. First ascent was in 1990 by a Japanese team. The northwest ridge was climbed in 1991 by a French team. It ends on the north ridge. The southeast spur is known as the Cezanne route, and it's a safer alternative than the Abruzzi spur. It avoids the Black Pyramid, which we'll talk about, and that was first summited in 1994. I'll show you a map of all these, by the way. I'll have to share one on Instagram. The west face is extremely technical, first climbed by a Russian team in 2007, and then the last kind of entry here is unclimbed faces. So the east face and the north face remain unclimbed due to instability and avalanche risk.
Wow.
On top of all the other stuff I already talked about for the east face. So kind of the most well-known, the most used is the Abruzzi spur, and it has 4 kind of main features. And these are 4, this is taking like the most horrifically challenging outdoor thing you can do, which is challenging from the beginning to the end. And we're distilling this down into kind of the 4 most difficult parts of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So explaining these isn't to say that the rest of it is less difficult.
Sure. If you just get through these 4, you're home free.
These are just the most difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one is called House's Chimney. It was named after a guy named House, and I was going to write his first name. I didn't. So that's my bad. So it's kind of the first one that you encounter if you go on the Abruzzi spur. It's about 6,700 meters up.
Okay.
And what it is it's a 100-foot or 30-meter tall crack in the rock that's almost vertical. It's between Camp 4 and Camp 5. If it's free climbed, it's a 5.6, which in climbing terms,
pretty good.
Well, it's kind of lower on. It's lower. It's considered a beginner climb.
You've got all this packing stuff and you're in a coat and snow pants and boots,
and
no
6,000 meters in the air and on a frigid mountain.
You can't breathe.
Yeah. There's a couple other.
I have a hard time breathing walking into a climbing gym. You know what I mean?
I'm having a hard time breathing sitting right here. There are a couple of ladders that are on it now that help with commercial trips. And there was a guy, I didn't write his name down either. Shoot, you can find it in the article. But there was a guy who was another well-known climber who climbed this House's Chimney, knowing that it was a 5.6, and he's like, oh, it's not going to be that bad. And then he got up to it. He's like, this is really much more difficult than because of all these other elements, you know? So it's a 100-foot long crack in the wall, on a rock wall that you have to climb up with snow and ice and rock and all that stuff. The second one you run into is called the Black Pyramid. It's at 7,200 meters, and it's a really steep, very, very rocky technical section where you have to use your upper body more than you use your lower body. You're like climbing rocks. You're straight up rock climbing now, right? The third one, and this one is probably the most deadly, is called the Bottleneck. At 8,200 meters, you encounter a really narrow, deadly couloir, C-O-U-L-O-I-R, which which is a really narrow gully between kind of two rocky peaks.
There's a couloir. There's a really famous one in Jackson Hole where they hold a unofficial. Well, maybe it's official now, but they've done some Red Bull sponsored events in it.
Really?
Where people they'll put a jump at the top, and then people will do a jump into this like couloir. Wow, it's wild. I'll find it and show it to you.
Please do. I'd love to see that. Yeah. All right, so you have a couloir. Is that how you said it?
I think.
Couloir?
That was also a guess from me.
Well,
I don't know any French.
I don't either.
Or French people.
And I'll never learn. So it's this narrow gully between kind of two rocky, icy peaks, and you're all underneath the Serac, which is that icy overhang from a glacier, right? So
wow,
the whole thing, you're climbing up through this like little gully. At any moment, a chunk of ice could fall and kill you.
Yeah.
It's very slippery.
And it has.
It has, actually. There's avalanches everywhere. This section has caused numerous climber fatalities, including some we'll talk about here in a second.
Yeah.
And then kind of the last big one is that you're on what's called as the Traverse, which is above 8,000 meters. It's a really exposed very steep sloping section that kind of goes kind of across a face of part of the mountain. But the whole thing runs underneath just a truly massive overhang of ice and snow, another big serac. So again, it's like at any point, a chunk of ice bigger than a house could fall on you and kill you, or an avalanche could start, or any number of things right there. And then you're toast. Then you're ragdolling 1,000 feet to your death.
Then they find you in a glacier 40 years later.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky. Gosh.
Should we talk about a couple of disasters?
You mean like climbing this mountain?
Yeah. And I debated whether or not it was disrespectful to talk about these disasters for entertainment, but I think it's important to talk about them.
I think it's educational.
Well, and it illustrates like how dangerous this place is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because every person we're about to talk about is an experienced climber. They all know exactly what they're doing. They all have the right equipment. They all have the right people. They're really well conditioned and very healthy and active and fit for this kind of thing, right? And they still died. So it's just a really unpredictable place. So we'll talk about 4 major disasters, and they call them a K2 disaster of this certain year. So the first one is 1986 K2 disaster. And over the course of a summer, 13 climbers died.
Wow.
And they died for various reasons. Severe weather, overcrowding causing problems, avalanches, falling rocks, exhaustion, and other accidents. One of them, I believe, was someone just like the rope wasn't long enough and they just slipped off the end of a rope and then just tumbled to their death.
Yikes.
We scoot up a few years to the 1995 K2 disaster. So 6 climbers perished due to severe weather, including brutal cold and 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Wow. That's so wild. And cold winds.
Like sub-zero cold winds.
Those winds are 100 miles an hour and just so cold. So cold.
It's incomprehensible.
Wow.
In 2008, K2 disaster, 11 climbers perished largely to an ice avalanche over the bottleneck. Among the deceased were members of France, Ireland, South Korea, Nepal, Norway, Pakistan, and Serbia.
Wow.
All kinds of people. And then the most recent is the 2021 K2 disaster. So on February 5th, 3 mountaineers went missing attempting to summit K2. So they were doing it without supplemental O2.
Okay.
So
wow. Crazy.
The idea is that you will acclimate and then you end up going real slow. You got to be super healthy and you go real slow because you're just taking the oxygen that you can take.
Yeah.
And it's a frighteningly more difficult way to climb something like this.
Absolutely.
So there were 4 people, Ali Sadpara and his son Sajid. And Sajid started feeling altitude sickness right about at the bottleneck, which we said was about 8,000, under 8,000 meters up. So they decided it was best for him to turn back. So he got a look at his dad and then 2 other men there, said, "See you later, good luck, love ya." And he was the last person to see any of them alive.
Oof.
He continued for the next several months to try and find their remains with volunteers and Sherpas and things like that were willing to go and look. And they were found 3 months later.
Wow.
Hanging from safety ropes pretty close near the bottleneck. They were unrecoverable, so they were interred on K2.
Whoa.
So he left his father and those 2 other men, and pretty shortly after he left them, they may not have died immediately, but they all ended up being in a place where they were unable to recover, right? So all very experienced.
Wow.
So there's a whole section, by the way. We don't have time to talk about it today because it's huge, but it's super interesting. So there's a whole section called Recent Records, Attempts, and Notable Events. And I want to talk a little bit about movies made from this, and then I want to talk about don't look it up. Okay, because you'll ruin the surprise.
I just want to make sure I've got the article.
Oh, sure.
Saved so I can
you should read the whole
check
thing,
it out
dude.
later.
This was such a crazy rabbit hole for me. So recent records, attempts, and notable events. Too long here. There's one that I want to cover, which was
of notable events.
Yep, it's probably the most phenomenal thing I've ever even heard of. But first, movies. Right after this.
Oh.
We're back into it.
Oh my gosh.
Tell me one thing in your life that you've done that's as extreme as what we're talking about now.
It's as extreme?
Yep.
I thought I got caught in a riptide once.
That's basically the same thing.
I was only waist deep.
I was at a swimming park.
So I walked out of it.
It was a lazy river.
I got left at a water park once.
Oh. I couldn't find my mom. All right, where did we leave off? Were we talking about movies?
We were talking about movie adaptations.
Okay, so
we were fixing to.
There's a few of them. Kind of the ones that I want to talk about. There's one called K2, which is kind of a...
it's a documentary?
Kind of a dramatized documentary about the first... No, it's not even that. It's a movie, but it's based on the first attempt of Americans to summit the mountain, which was in 1938. There's also a movie called Vertical Limit, which is a fairly popular movie.
I've seen that one.
Have you?
I have.
Yeah.
I remember watching that fairly young, like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And it's like the opening scene is they are climbing in like southern Utah.
Okay.
Which there's tons of climbing in like Moab and southern Utah and stuff.
I'm not going to say anything. I think I've seen this too. You just jogged my memory.
So the opening scene is they're doing this really intense, high technical climb.
Yeah.
And something happens and they all end up caught on this rope and it's about to break. And then their dad is hanging at the end of the rope.
Yeah.
And he's like, the only way you're going to survive is you got to cut me off. So that the rope can support the two of you.
Yeah.
And so the son has to cut the rope and
kill his
dad so that they'll survive.
Oh my
That's how the movie
gosh.
starts.
And then we end up on K2.
Gosh, I didn't realize that. I mean, I was young and I kept thinking like this movie's so intense. Like it's not a horror movie, but it's so intense that like it's making me nervous and scared. And I just kept thinking, why are we watching this? And we watched it. Like I was like spending the week at some cousin's house.
Yeah.
And we watched it like 3 times that weekend.
Nice.
And every time I was like, why are we watching this?
3 times in a weekend?
We watched it more than once.
That's outrageous.
I know we did.
I've never watched that many movies in a row of the same kind.
Isn't Bill Paxton in that?
Yeah, he is. Yep. All right. So
R.I.P. Bill Paxton.
Amen, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, so Vertical Limit is about a climber leading a rescue after an avalanche traps his sister on K2.
Okay.
So it must be he must be the kid that killed his dad all those years ago.
Because he quits climbing, and to honor the memory of her father, she's like, we're going to climb K2. Sure. And then, gets caught, and so he's got to go find her.
Wild, dude.
I just assumed it was Everest. But K2 makes a little more sense.
It's K2, baby. Okay, that pretty much covers everything.
Those are the 2 movies?
Well, there's a few others, but those were kind of the 2 notable. Yeah.
Okay, so I've already seen one of them.
Yeah.
All right.
I have one more thing I want to talk about before we wrap the episode.
Okay. This feels like you've been hiding the secret from me.
I have been.
I didn't know your format for it anyway, so I didn't know anything you were about to talk about tonight.
The reason I saved this for last is because it is, and I think I can confidently say, maybe with the exception of one other thing, it's the most insane thing I've ever heard somebody do. Ever.
Okay.
So, I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep and build the tension. Have you ever watched that movie Free Solo?
I've watched like half of it. I never made it to his climb, but
that's the best
I know,
part.
right? Well, I was like watching it in pieces, like in between classes and stuff, and then just like never got around to finishing it. You know what I mean? So I know I missed the friggin' best part. But
it is the best part.
I watched how he lived in a van for a while.
Yeah, literally the most boring parts of the movie.
The awkward dynamics with him and his girlfriend.
Yeah. So Alex Honnold is the climber there, and he was the first person to free solo El Capitan, which free soloing and climbing is climbing without a safety rope. It is you in the mountain, however many feet up.
Which El Capitan is insane anyways.
Yeah, it's in Yosemite National Park, California.
And then climbing free solo more than 10 feet is irresponsible, to say the least.
Amen. And he's up forever up there. There's one scene in that movie where there's like a shelf that he's climbing, there's like a foot wide or maybe even an 8-inch wide shelf.
That's so
on a
crazy,
sheer cliff face, and he's like sidestepping on it to shuffle over to one section.
Gosh, dude.
And then there's a part that he has to like swing his whole body, and if he has a grip on one side, it's like a kind of a 90-degree angle almost. So he's like holding on one side,
like
and
a corner.
Just an empty drop below him. And he's got holding on one side, and he's got to swing over and grab the other side. And if he misses on the other side, he dies because he won't be able to hold himself up with the hand that's already held onto the cliff.
Yeah, I got to go back and finish it.
The tension's unbelievable.
I know it's like 3 or 4 years old now.
The only other thing in my life that has given me the same feelings of anxiety is watching a 12-minute documentary from Red Bull.
Cool.
About a July 22nd, 2018 attempt, and successful attempt, I might add, of a Polish mountaineer named Andrzej Bargiel, who became the first person to ski from the summit of K2 to the base camp of K2.
No way. That is irresponsible.
I'm going to tell you about it. We're going to wrap the episode, and then I'm going to show you the documentary. We're going to link the documentary in the show notes. Please go check it out. We're going to link it in Instagram, all that. Anywhere we can put it, we'll put it. It is one of the most phenomenal things I've ever watched in my whole life. And me and you, Mitch, are skiers.
Yeah.
And so we've skied.
Very, very competent, very good skiers, yeah.
And we've skied our whole lives. I've skied since I was just a little kid. And watching this, I have never felt so uncomfortable watching skis and snow in my whole life.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
First of all, hiking that with skis on top of all your other gear.
Yeah.
Because you're not skiing up it.
No.
Golly, man.
Nope. So you've got skis strapped to your back, and you're going to go hike up this mountain. And then from the summit, strap your skis on and get after it.
Yikes.
So let me talk about what the American Alpine Club had to say about this, and then I'll share maybe
said, what the heck?
a couple of my thoughts watching the
Who
documentary.
let him do this?
I should say right at the outset, other people have skied sections of K2, and other people have died trying to ski sections of K2.
For sure.
So he's the first one to do it the whole length without taking his skis off.
Oh my gosh.
In the film, there's a couple of moments where he's got his skis on and he just kind of slumps against the mountain to try and catch his breath. I think we can give him that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't just bomb it from summit to base camp
without like an oxygen tank on your back the whole way.
Yeah.
Golly. How long did it take him? Like a half hour?
Actually, I don't know. I don't know that I ever read that. I think it was much longer than a half hour. You're going 28,000 feet. All right, so let's see. Bargiel ascended to base camp carrying all of his gear, and it doesn't even talk about this, but he narrowly avoids. This is all from the American Alpine Club, by the way. He narrowly avoids a disaster when his high altitude suit caught on fire.
What?
It doesn't talk anymore about how that even happened.
That's the biggest cliffhanger of this whole episode.
Unbelievable.
How does your suit catch on fire on a snowy mountain?
That's how this journey starts, by the way. So, like, if that happened to me, I'd be like, I'm thinking skiing down this whole thing is probably not a good idea.
The only way to put this fire out is to ski it out.
Ski. As hard and fast as I can go. So after he summits, there's light winds and then intermittent clouds. Bargiel faced a really thick fog on the descent. So this is after he's got his skis on. And you can see it in the video. There's unexpectedly deep snow that made the initial section easier, but then he navigates steep walls above the bottleneck that required extreme caution to avoid triggering avalanches. He's doing all this, by the way, trying to avoid kicking avalanches off to kill other climbers that are climbing up the mountain after him. Photographer Marek Ogien's guidance via radio became crucial when a heavy fog obscured Bargiel's route. Ogien directed him to a safe spot, taking on the life or death responsibility of steering him away from avalanche zones.
Oh my gosh.
So at the traverse, Bargiel dealt with falling ice blocks and used ropes for, I think, a 10 meter or 200 meter section, showcasing his skill and resolve. He also navigated a very unstable snow and crevasse-filled terrain with very sharp ski cuts to manage the dangerous slope. So after 7 hours.
That's a full day on the mountain.
He finally reached the glacier at the base camp, totally drained. Like,
I can only imagine.
And then he is kind of welcomed. He gets a hero's welcome back in Poland. And then his dad, he runs into his dad, and then his dad says, "Well, I'm glad you had a good holiday. Now it's back to work." After he just did this thing that no human being has ever done.
Where have you been?
So I want to talk about it a little bit because I really encourage you to go and watch the video if you can. It's 12 minutes long. It's worth watching from the beginning to the end. But there are a few moments. I mean, the whole thing is horrific. But he starts off. I've skied black diamonds before.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of like double black diamonds. But the thing I hate the most on a ski slope is when you're on like a convex slope where it's bulging outward and you are skiing on the outward edge and there's nothing on either side of you or behind you, or like you're the furthest point forward, so to speak. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so he straps these skis on right at the summit and starts getting after it. And he is doing that. It's just like nothingness out in front of him.
Yeah.
And it's so steep. He's going super slow. He's giving fist bumps to the climbers that are coming up after him. All of them are looking at him like he's completely insane. And then he gets into this thick fog, which you and I have skied at Snowbird Resort once.
Yeah.
Where we were in the middle of, I would probably call it a blizzard.
And honestly, it was terrible.
And kind of scary.
Absolutely.
Because you couldn't tell the difference between what you were skiing on and what was in front of you.
That's so true. It's the weirdest thing.
So there's a moment where he's in such thick fog on K2. In the video, you cannot see what is mountain and what is thin air.
Whoa.
He gets down, and he's taking the whole thing super, super careful. He doesn't bomb the hill at any point, which is obviously the right choice. But there's one more section where he's skiing on kind of this ridge. On either side of him is what must be 1,000-meter drop on both sides. Mm-hmm. The surface that he's skiing on and that is skiable looks to be about the width of his skis.
Golly.
Like sideways.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Okay.
So if you turn sideways against the mountain, so the whole thing is maybe like 5 feet, 6 feet wide, and then 1,000-meter drop on both sides. Both sides. That whole thing is about 10 or 20 meters long. I can't remember exactly. And so you're watching him ski down what is this? Essentially a narrow passage with death on both ends. And it's like, I don't know, dude. It's like it's one of the most triumphant things. Like, I feel proud to be a human watching stuff like this. Yeah. Knowing that I'm comfortably sitting on my couch at home. And I never have to be faced with this anxiety in my life. But even as a skier, I watch it, and I feel like it just hits a little bit harder because, like, the stuff he's skiing down, there's not a level that can classify the difficulty that he's skiing.
Yeah.
And he's also done it with no oxygen, having just climbed 28,000 feet into the air on the most difficult mountain known to mankind.
Wow. So we need to wrap this up because I want to watch this.
Well, we should wrap it up. And we can, because that's pretty much it. So I want to end with one last thing.
Yeah.
So if this all sounds super fascinating to you and you feel like you got the itch, we've got a deal for you. This typically costs between $35,000 to $50,000 per person.
What?
Depending on the type of expedition and whatever support level you have. But today, for this week only, visit I2CanClimbK2.website and use code LOWGRADE for 2% off your trip.
What, actually?
No. You thought
save nearly $87 on your $35,000 trip.
You thought I2CanClimbK2 was a real website?
Look, I thought there was some crazy thing where these Sherpas were putting on any type of deal. It's like, yeah, promote yourself.
I would love to have a deal doing this, frankly, but it's never going to happen.
Oh, I thought we had something there.
That's it, dude. That's K2.
That's wild. I had no idea that it was that extreme.
Yeah.
Why is it not talked about more?
Because Everest is talked about. Because Everest is the biggest.
Because it's a little bit taller.
Which we should do an episode on Everest too, because it has its own like rich history. You know?
Sure.
But yeah, dude, K2.
Wow. Super cool.
So if you are into this kind of thing and you want to be someone who has made their mark on mountaineering history, and you have the money and you have the competence and you have the courage, go climb K2. Tons of people have climbed Everest, and that's great. And it's difficult in its own right.
So many people,
but only 800 have ever hit the summit on K2.
That's pretty wild.
So,
yeah, give that one a shot.
Do it, Chad.
Well, if you want to learn more about us and our podcast and what we're all about, check us out on social media.
Social meds.
Where you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Other Brothers Studio.
We got Facebook. We got Instagram.
We're on X.
We're on X. Don't search for us there. There's not much going on. That's it.
You can also shoot us an email with any questions or thoughts or even comments you have about our podcast.
Or if you're Polish or Japanese or Russian or from the Czech Republic, and I got any of those names wrong, let us know how to say those right. You can email us hello@otherbrothers.studio, and we would genuinely love to hear your feedback. That's it, pal.
Fantastic.